So today we're diving into an incredible story. It's about revolution, sure, but at its heart, it's about friendship and a promise that would stretch across 3 decades. We're talking about a relationship that literally reshaped the 20th century. Get this. A man steps up to the podium at the United Nations, the world stage, and gives what's now considered the shortest speech in history. Just 3 words: patria o muerte, homeland or death. And then he just walks away. Can you imagine the confidence, the sheer swagger to do that?
Patria o muerte.
Well, that man was none other than Che Guevara. And to really understand him, to get his story, you have to understand his bond with another giant of history, Fidel Castro. You really can't tell one of their stories without the other. Their friendship is the absolute heart of this whole thing. So let's set the scene. It's 1955. Fidel Castro, a young lawyer, has been exiled from Cuba and he's in Mexico plotting to take down the US-backed dictator Batista. One night, his brother introduces him to this Argentine doctor, a guy who's way more interested in revolution than in medicine. And yeah, that doctor was Che. They both shared this burning opposition to American influence in their backyard, and that common ground sparked a conversation that went on all night long. As the sun came up, Castro asked Che to join his cause. Che said yes, but he had one single, non-negotiable condition. He said, "Look, I will fight with you, but when Cuba is free, you will not stop me from liberating other countries." Castro agreed. And with that handshake, this unbreakable vow was made. And that single agreement kicked off one of the most improbable revolutions you'll ever hear about. I mean, this was a total David versus Goliath situation, a fight that was built on scrappy guerrilla tactics and, above all, an incredible sense of loyalty. Now, their journey was anything but smooth. They managed to gather 82 men and set sail for Cuba in 1956. But Batista's army was waiting for them. They were ambushed almost the second they landed. The attack was a catastrophe. Most of the men were killed or captured. Only a tiny group, including a wounded Che, managed to escape into the dense Sierra Maestra Mountains. From that near disaster, it would take them 3 long, brutal years of guerrilla warfare before they finally won. And it's in those mountains that their bond was really forged in fire. You see, Che had debilitating asthma. We're talking so bad that his body would sometimes turn blue when they were training. Some of the other rebels told Castro to leave him, that he was a liability. Castro's reply was immediate and absolute. "If Che has problems, I will carry him on my back up the mountain." Simple as that. There was no way he was leaving his friend behind. So after 2 years of fighting from the mountains, Castro realized they needed a game changer. To win the war, they had to cripple Batista's supply lines. And the key to the entire island, the logistical heart of it all, was one city, Santa Clara. He looked at Che and gave him what seemed like an impossible mission: take the city. The challenge here was just massive. Batista knew how vital Santa Clara was. The moment he heard Che was on the move, he sent a heavily armored train just packed with soldiers and weapons to obliterate the rebels. So the question is, how on earth could 400 guys possibly stop an armored train? Che's plan was nothing short of guerrilla genius. First, he had his men sneak into the city, take the high ground, and cut every communication line they could find, isolating the city completely. Then, he used his network of local sympathizers to find out the train's exact path. And this is the brilliant part. He went to the local university, commandeered their bulldozers, and just tore the train tracks right out of the ground. So when the train inevitably derailed, Che's men surrounded it. But what he did next was a psychological masterstroke. Instead of executing the captured soldiers, which was a grim tactic he'd unfortunately used later on against political foes, he had his own doctors treat their wounds. That single act of mercy spread like wildfire across Cuba. The message was clear: these guys are liberators. Just 2 days later, a totally demoralized Batista fled the country. The revolution was won. But winning Cuba, that was only Act 1 of their story, because you have to remember that promise they made back in Mexico. And now we get to the tragic final chapter of Che's life, a chapter that starts with him honoring his word. A few years later, by 1965, Che was getting restless. He'd been a part of Castro's government, but at his core, he was a revolutionary. And true to their original vow, Castro let him go, even giving him fighters and weapons. He told Che that if his new mission ever failed, the door to Cuba would always be open for him. So after a stint fighting in the Congo, Che turned his attention to Bolivia. But this time, a trap was waiting. The CIA was hell-bent on stopping Che, and they'd been paying off local farmers to be informants. Well, one of them, a man named Honorado Rojas, stumbled upon Che's jungle camp and immediately reported it. Acting on CIA advice, Bolivian forces moved in fast, surrounded the area, and captured Che Guevara alive. Now, the official U.S. government line was that they wanted a trial, but the CIA agents and Bolivian officers on the ground, they were terrified. They knew a public trial would turn Che into an even bigger global martyr, so they made a different call: execute him immediately. The next day, he was shot 9 times. And to prove he was dead without having to move the body, they did something gruesome. They cut off his hands. When the news of Che's murder hit Fidel Castro, he was devastated. The man who was like a brother, who helped him win a nation, was gone. But his grief quickly hardened into a cold, calculated vow. A vow that would drive him for the next 30 years and split into 2 separate missions. Mission number 1, revenge. Castro handed his intelligence agency, the G2, a hit list of every single person involved in Che's death. And over the next couple of years, G2 agents went to work. Roberto Quintanilla, the Bolivian officer who gave the order to cut off Che's hands, assassinated in Germany. Honorato Rojas, the farmer who sold him out, gunned down in Bolivia. One by one, they crossed every name off the list. But the second mission, that one was far more personal, and it would take far, far longer. For 30 years, think about that, 30 years, Fidel Castro had one obsession: find Che's body and bring him home. See, the Bolivian government always claimed Che's body had been cremated and his ashes scattered. But then, a former Bolivian minister, totally fed up with the CIA's meddling in his country, leaked an explosive secret. He confirmed Che's body was never burned, it was buried in his secret, unmarked grave. For Castro, that was all he needed to hear. The hunt was officially on. And Castro played the long game. It was incredible. He sent his best G2 agents into Bolivia undercover, posing as doctors and aid workers. They lived there for decades, just waiting for the Bolivian officers who knew the secret to retire, figuring they'd be more likely to talk. And it worked. In 1995, a retired general finally broke his silence. Che was buried near an airport runway in a small town called Valle Grande. Using that tip, Castro's team matched old press photos with modern satellite images, and they pinpointed the spot. So in 1997, a Cuban team started digging right next to that airport runway. They soon hit a mass grave with 7 skeletons inside. And as they carefully examined each one, they found it. Chilling, undeniable proof. One of the skeletons was missing both of its hands. After 30 long years, the search was finally over. Castro sent a military plane immediately. And when it landed back in Cuba, he was there, standing on the tarmac, to personally receive his friend's coffin. He told the nation this was not a time for tears, but for triumph. Che's remains were then taken on a massive procession across the country, finally laid to rest in a mausoleum in Santa Clara, the very city he liberated all those years ago. And there, at that memorial in Santa Clara, Castro himself lit an eternal flame in Che's honor. It's never gone out. It burns to this day, a symbol of a promise that was kept and a friendship that quite literally transcended death itself. You know, their whole story started with a promise made during one long night of conversation in Mexico. It ended with a 30-year quest to bring a fallen friend home. It really makes you stop and think, what is the ultimate measure of loyalty? What does it truly mean to keep your word?